So, as you read through this, you may have noticed that Latin word order is not necessarily standard English word order, and you certainly know this from your lower level Latin classes as well. So, in this slide, we're going to rehearse two things which will hopefully be useful to you as you practice for this class. The first is just the vocabulary from this passage, which you're expected to know. And the second is to identify a few of these word order tricks, which Latin is so fond of. So the vocabulary, to begin with, if you look at the top of the page, we have fido, fidere, fisus, sum, to trust, to place one's confidence in. Potens, potentus, powerful. Dominor, dominari, dominatus, sum, to lord it over, to exercise dominion. Lois loe, light, fickle. Laetus, laeta, laetum, happy. Ferro, ferre, tuli, latum, an irregular verb which tries often to imitate a third conjugation verb, which means to carry, bear, or say. Now, we also have some rhetorical constructions in this passage, and I wanted to call your attention to three of them in the current lesson. First, we have something that's very common in Latin, referred to as hyperbaton. Especially in Latin poetry, if you look at the two purple words here, which, as we mentioned while we were translating, are both in the ablative case, you'll notice that they're separated from one another by a few intervening words. You recall that adjectives and nouns in Latin agree with one another in case, number, and gender. However, they don't necessarily have to be next to one another in the sentence. And we can use this to good purpose in Latin poetry. We can actually create all sorts of interesting word order tricks by separating the adjective from the noun. We're always going to know that those two go together simply because they're in the same case, number, gender, and we can recognize their agreement from their endings. So when they're separated from one another by intervening words, we refer to this noun and this adjective as undergoing something that we refer to as hyperbaton, which just means a stepping over in Greek. You can also reduplicate hyperbata and create various kinds of interlocking word order. The most famous might be chiasmus, where we have A, B, B, A word order. But equally common, perhaps even more common, is synkesis, where we have two interlocking hyperbata in the order A, B, A, B. And we see one of these in the reading passage that we just got through a moment ago. In the dative plurals, rebus, laetes, where the noun res, rei, feminine, thing or affair, is modified by the adjective laetus, laeta, laetum, happy. They're both dative plural. But then we also have animus animi, a masculine word that means mind, modified by the adjective, also in blue, if you look below, credulus, credula, credulum. And again, how do the Romans know that these go together without the color coding? Well, they look at the endings, and they recognize intuitively that animus and credulus are the same case number gender, and rebus laetes are also the same case number gender. But if you look at the order, animus, A, rebus, B, second noun. Credulus, adjective modifying noun A, and laetes, adjective modifying noun B. And that's why we refer to this as AB word order, or synkesis. And finally, a slightly less intricate word order trick. If you look at the very end of this passage, we turn away from the person to whom we're speaking, the audience. Remember, this is Hecuba speaking in the Troades. And we address the city of Troy. So Hecuba turns from the audience and says, let him look upon me and you, Troy. And this is referred to as apostrophe, which is Greek for simply turning away. All right, so in the next slide, we're going to look at some of the grammar that we've encountered in these passages and see if we can do a little bit of practice with some of the grammar that we know. Morphology, you probably remember, refers to the endings of words. Morphe in Greek simply means a form. So nouns take endings, verbs take endings, adjectives take endings, and what we're looking at now is noun endings. In our discussion of hyperbaton and synkesis, we saw some examples of nouns and adjectives agreeing in their endings. And in a moment, we're going to look at how these agree and what it is that constitutes this agreement in case, number, gender.